The air in Elysian Fields always smelled of three things: money, grilled meat, and secrets. For Amara, waiting in the polished shadows of the private dining wing, it mostly smelled like survival. The money was the scent of vintage scotch breathed from crystal, of bespoke cologne clinging to tailored wool. The meat was the rich, smoky perfume of prime galbi sizzling over white-hot binchaton, a sound like expensive whispers. The secrets were the metallic tang of fear under it all. Her fear. The fear of every other person in a black uniform and a starched white apron. Tonight, that fear was a living thing. It had a name. Choi Min-jun is on his way up. 20th floor, Mr. Park, the floor manager, hissed into the staff alcove, his face slick with a sweat that had nothing to do with the kitchen's heat. Room 3. Amara, you're on point. Remember the protocol. Eyes down, voice soft, anticipate, do not ask. Amara's posture didn't change. A nod, barely perceptible. Yes, mister. Park. Her voice was a low, deferential murmur, the texture of velvet worn thin. Inside, she was calculating. The next round of her grandmother's immunotherapy was $42,000. This job, with its humiliating protocols and the silent indignities she swallowed with every shift, paid for 28% of that. The tips from a whale like Choi Min-jun could push it to 35. Dignity was a luxury she had traded for her grandmother's time. A fair exchange. A necessary one. She smoothed the front of her apron, her long, dark fingers precise and steady. The uniform was designed to make her invisible, a monochrome shadow against the dark wood and burnished gold of the restaurant. Her hair, a crown of intricate braids, was pulled back so tightly it made the corners of her eyes ache. Her hands, though, were her own, strong, capable, with clean, short nails. They were the hands of someone who could dismantle a balance sheet as easily as they could clear a table. No one here knew that. No one was meant to. Her past life as an analyst for a boutique global intelligence firm felt like a story someone else had lived. A life of secure servers, encrypted data streams, and the quiet thrill of unraveling complex knots of financial corruption. A life she'd lost when she'd followed a thread that led directly to the Choi family's holdings and was professionally suffocated for her curiosity. Now she served them. The irony was a constant bitter taste in her mouth. As she prepared the service cart, her eyes swept the main dining floor. In a quiet corner booth, Chairman Kim sat alone, as he did every Tuesday. A man of old money and older power, with eyes that saw more than he let on. He watched her sometimes, a flicker of something in his gaze. Not pity, not interest, recognition. It was unsettling. Tonight she avoided his gaze, focusing on the task. The private elevator chimed. A ripple of tension went through the room. Patrons straightened. Staff froze. Choi Min-jun did not walk into a room. He occupied it, displacing the air with an aura of inherited arrogance. He was flanked by two sycophants who laughed too loudly at his unfunny jokes. He was loud, his suit was a shade too bright, and his watch was a monstrosity of gold and diamonds that could have paid for her grandmother's entire treatment protocol, with enough left over for a house. He swept into room 3 without a glance at Amara as she held the heavy door. She followed him in, her movements fluid and silent, and began the service, pouring the water. Presenting the banchan, her face was a perfect mask of pleasant neutrality. "Ah, the waitress," Min-jun slurred in Korean, gesturing dismissively at her with his chopsticks. His friends snickered. "They even have the dark ones here now, so exotic." Amara's hands did not falter as she placed a dish of seasoned spinach on the table. She kept her eyes on the dish. He was speaking Korean to exclude her, to render her an object. It was a common tactic among men like him, a power play as crude as it was predictable. He assumed, like everyone else, that the black woman in the waitress uniform was just that, a prop, an uncomprehending piece of scenery. He didn't know her foster father, a grizzled old gangster from Busan, had insisted she learn the language of his world. Not the clean soul standard taught in classrooms, but the gritty, idiomatic Korean of the docks and the back rooms, laced with the slang of the Jopak underworld. She understood every syllable. She understood the insult in the word choice, the contempt in the intonation. And she filed it away, another small cut to be endured. For Grandma, the meal progressed, a symphony of quiet service and loud, obnoxious boasting. Then came the incident. A young waiter, barely 18 and new to the floor, entered with a fresh bottle of premium soju. His hands were trembling, his eyes wide with the terror of serving Choi Min-jun. As he reached for the empty bottle, his sleeve caught on a water glass. Time seemed to slow. The glass tipped, a silent, graceful arc of water and crystal heading directly for Min-jun's lap. Before anyone could react, Amara moved, a single, decisive step. She didn't try to catch the glass. Instead, her hand shot out and bumped the young waiter's arm, a carefully calculated nudge. It made it look like she had caused the spill. She absorbed the blame, becoming the shield. The water splashed across Min-jun's expensive trousers. Silence. Absolute. The sycophants froze, their smiles wiped clean. The young waiter looked like he was about to faint. Min-jun's face went from florid to purple. He stared at the dark patch on his thigh as if he'd been shot. His head snapped up, his eyes locking onto Amara. "You clumsy bitch," he snarled, this time in English for maximum public humiliation. "My deepest apologies, sir." Amara's voice was perfectly even. She bowed her head. "It was entirely my fault. I was careless." The young waiter stared at her, his mouth agape with a mixture of horror and gratitude. But Min-jun was not a man to accept a simple apology. He needed a spectacle. His eyes darted around the table, landing on the small stone pot of bubbling hot sundubu jjigae. A cruel smile twisted his lips. "Careless?" he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Carelessness needs to be taught a lesson." He picked up the pot. The stew was volcanically hot, the steam rising in a fragrant cloud. Amara knew what was coming. She braced herself. 3 seconds. That's what she gave herself. 3 seconds to decide. Fight back, lose the job, lose the money, lose her grandmother's chance, or endure. 1, the cost of the treatment. 2, the feel of her grandmother's frail hand in hers. 3, the choice was made. He stumbled, lurching toward her. The contents of the pot cascaded down her arm, white-hot, searing pain. It was a shocking electric agony that stole her breath. The thick, boiling stew clung to her skin, scalding her through the sleeve of her uniform. Her entire body went rigid, a primal scream trapped in her throat. But she did not make a sound. She stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. She would not give him the satisfaction of her tears, of her pain. Her stillness was her only weapon. He laughed. A short, ugly bark. He pulled out his phone and took a picture of her arm, of the red blistering skin where the tofu and chili paste clung to her. "A little souvenir," he said to his friends, who now managed weak sycophantic chuckles. Mr. Park rushed in, his face pale. "Mr. Choi, is everything all right? I am so sorry." He was apologizing to the man who had just assaulted his employee. "Get her out of my sight." Min-jun waved a dismissive hand, already turning back to his meal. "And bring me another stew. This one is ruined." Amara turned, her movements stiff with contained agony, and walked out of the room. She did not run. She did not cry. She walked with the controlled dignity of a queen leaving a battlefield. The pain was a roaring fire in her arm, but the cold fury in her heart was a glacial certainty. This was not over. She didn't see the man in the corner booth, the one who had been there earlier, watching the entire scene. His face was a mask of cold fury, his knuckles white where he gripped a glass of whiskey. He had seen her take the blame for the boy. He had seen her endure the assault without flinching. He had seen everything. His name was Kwon Ji-hoon, and he had just bought the restaurant. The next day, the entire morning staff was assembled in the main dining room. The air was thick with rumor and anxiety. Mr. Park stood at the front, wringing his hands. Amara stood in the back row, her left arm bandaged from wrist to elbow beneath her uniform sleeve. The burn throbbed with a dull, persistent beat, a reminder of yesterday's humiliation. She had refused to take the day off. Weakness was an infection. She couldn't afford to let it take root. "As you know," Mr. Park began, his voice trembling slightly, "Elysian Fields has been operating under the umbrella of Royal Dynasty Hospitality for the past 5 years. As of this morning, that has changed. The restaurant has been sold." A collective gasp went through the staff. New owners meant new management. New management meant purges. "Please show your respect to the new owner," Mr. Park continued, bowing deeply toward the entrance. Chairman Kwon Ji-hoon. The man who entered was the same man from the corner booth. He moved with a predatory grace, a stillness in motion that commanded attention without demanding it. He was flanked by two men in dark, impeccably tailored suits who moved in perfect sync with him, their eyes constantly scanning the room. The atmosphere shifted, the ambient fear in the room crystallizing into something sharp and focused. He wore a simple dark gray suit that probably cost more than Amara's car, the fabric draping perfectly over a powerful frame. A platinum watch, understated and elegant, circled his wrist. It wasn't flashy like Min Jun's, but Amara knew the brand. It could pay for her grandmother's treatment for a full year. His black hair was expertly cut, and his face was a study in controlled lines and sharp angles. But it was his eyes that held the room captive. They were dark, cold, and missed nothing. They were the last thing you noticed, and the thing you could never forget. Kwon Ji-hoon came to a stop at the front of the room. He did not smile. He did not offer pleasantries. He simply stood there, his presence a weight that settled over them all. His gaze swept across the assembled staff, a slow, methodical assessment. When his eyes landed on Amara, they paused for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something unreadable passed through them before moving on. But she felt it. A direct, piercing acknowledgement. He knew who she was. He had been there. "My name is Kwon Ji-hoon," his voice carried effortlessly, a low baritone that was quiet yet held absolute authority. There was no need to raise it. "My standards are higher than you are accustomed to. Inefficiency will not be tolerated. Disloyalty will be punished. Excellence will be rewarded." He spoke in perfect, unaccented English, but the cadence was Korean, declarative, final. "Mr. Park," he said, without looking at the manager, "you are dismissed. Collect your things." Mr. Park's face crumpled. "Chairman Kwon, please, now." The word was not loud, but it cut through the air like a shard of glass. One of the flanking men stepped forward, a silent invitation for Mr. Park to leave. He scurried away, a broken man. Ji-hoon's eyes found Amara again. "You, the waitress from last night, my office, 5 minutes." He turned and walked away, his men falling in behind him, leaving a wake of stunned silence. Every head turned to stare at Amara. They looked at her with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She was the first to be summoned. This, they all assumed, was her public execution. Amara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach, but her expression remained serene. She gave a slight bow to no one in particular and walked toward the manager's, now Chairman Kwon's, office, her back straight, her steps measured. The throb in her arm was a dull drumbeat, counting down to the end of her job, the end of her hope. The office was transformed. What had been a cluttered, chaotic space under Mr. Park was now Spartan and immaculate. A single, massive desk of dark mahogany sat before a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. Kwon Ji-hoon stood at the window, his back to her. She waited in silence. He didn't turn around for a full minute, a deliberate power play. She understood. She remained perfectly still, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. "You took the blame for the boy," he said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." Her voice, deferential. "Why?" "He is young. He was frightened. He has a family to support." "So do you," he stated, finally turning. His eyes were intense, analytical. "I ran a check on all employees this morning. Amara Diallo, grandmother, Adama Diallo. Stage 4 lung cancer, experimental treatment at St. Jude's. The cost is significant." Her mask of neutrality fractured for a second. He had pried into her life with casual, invasive efficiency. It was a violation, but also a confirmation. This man was not a simple restaurateur. "Your arm," he gestured with his chin, "the burn. It is being treated, sir. Choi Min-jun is a regular guest. His father's company is a valuable business partner in many ventures." He was testing her. He wanted to see if she would complain, if she would demand justice. Amara kept her gaze level. "I understand the importance of discretion in the service industry, sir." A long silence stretched between them. He walked around the desk and sat, steepling his fingers. He studied her, not like a boss studying an employee, but like a predator studying an interesting new variable in its territory. "You are either the most loyal employee I have ever encountered," he said, his voice deadly quiet, "or you are a fool." Amara met his gaze. The deference in her posture remained, but her eyes held a spark of something else, something hard and unyielding. "I am neither, sir. I am a woman with a responsibility." He leaned back, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It did not reach his eyes. "Choi Min-jun is returning tonight. He has reserved the same room. He specifically requested you as his server." The cold knot in her stomach returned, tighter this time. It was a threat, a challenge. Min-jun wanted to continue his game, to further humiliate her, and her new boss was going to let him. "I will be ready, sir," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "Good," Ji-hoon replied, "because tonight you will not be serving him." Amara blinked, confused. "You will be dining with me," he continued, his eyes locked on hers. At the table next to his. Her mind reeled. This was a different kind of test, a different kind of battlefield. "Sir, I don't understand. I am a man who values competence. I saw it yesterday. When you protected the weak, when you endured the unthinkable with a dignity I have not seen in a long time," he explained, his voice low and intense. "But Choi Min-jun is an infection, and I do not allow infections to fester in my house. He believes he owns this place, that he can abuse my staff with impunity. Tonight, we are going to teach him a lesson about the nature of ownership." He opened a drawer and slid a black credit card across the polished desk. It was heavy, matte, with no name, only a single gold insignia. "There is a boutique 2 blocks from here. Tell them you are with me. Purchase something appropriate for dinner, then return. You have 2 hours." Amara looked at the card, then back at his unreadable face. This was not a rescue. It was a deployment. He was arming her, positioning her on the board for a move he wanted to make. She was being used as a pawn in a game between powerful men. But a pawn, she knew, could still check a king. "Yes, sir," she said, taking the card. Her fingers closed around the cool, heavy plastic. It felt like the weight of a weapon. 2 hours later, Amara stood before the mirror in the staff locker room, a stranger looking back at her. The dress was a sheath of midnight blue silk that clung to her form, elegant and severe. It was understated, yet its perfect cut and luxurious fabric screamed wealth more loudly than any of Min-jun's gaudy accessories. Her braids were coiled into an elegant chignon at the nape of her neck, and the boutique's owner had insisted on a pair of simple diamond studs. They felt like ice against her skin. Her bandaged arm was a stark white slash against the dark silk, a visible mark of the conflict to come. She had refused to cover it. It was part of her uniform now. When she walked out onto the dining floor, a hush fell over the staff. They stared, their eyes wide. She was no longer one of them. She was something else. Kwon Ji-hoon was waiting for her at a prime table, the one with the best view of the city and, not coincidentally, a direct line of sight to room 3's entrance. He stood as she approached, a flicker of approval in his dark eyes. He held her chair, a simple courtesy that felt loaded with significance. "You look formidable," he said as he sat opposite her. "Thank you, Chairman Kwon." "Ji-hoon," he corrected quietly. "In this, we are partners." The private elevator chimed. Choi Min-jun arrived, louder and more arrogant than the night before. He strode toward room 3, laughing with his friends, and then he saw them. He stopped dead. His eyes went from Ji-hoon to Amara, and a look of complete, baffled confusion washed over his face. He saw his waitress, the object of his casual cruelty, dressed in couture and sitting opposite the new owner of the restaurant. The power dynamic he understood had been shattered, and his brain couldn't compute the new reality. He stared at her, at the dress, at the bandage on her arm. His mouth opened and closed silently. Ji-hoon ignored him completely, his attention focused on Amara. "What did you do before this?" he asked, his voice low. "I was in risk analysis," she replied, her eyes never leaving Ji-hoon's, refusing to give Min-jun the satisfaction of her attention. "For whom?" "A firm that valued discretion." "And you left because—" "I was too good at my job. I found things my employers preferred to remain hidden." Ji-hoon nodded slowly, a silent understanding passing between them. "Things concerning the Choi family?" "Among others." Inside room 3, Min-jun was losing his mind. They could hear his raised voice, demanding answers from the terrified new manager. He wanted his waitress. He wanted the game to continue as planned. He burst out of the room, his face red with fury, and marched toward their table. His friends hovered nervously behind him. Kwon Ji-hoon Si, he began, his voice tight with barely controlled rage, trying to maintain a veneer of politeness. There seems to be a misunderstanding. This employee was supposed to be serving my room. He gestured at Amara as if she were a piece of furniture. Ji-hoon took a slow sip of his wine, then placed the glass down with deliberate precision. He looked up at Min-jun, his eyes cold as a winter sea. "She is not my employee," he said, his voice quiet. "She is my guest." Min-jun's jaw tightened. "Your guest? She's a waitress, a clumsy one at that. She burned herself yesterday, probably looking for a lawsuit." He switched to Korean, his voice dripping with condescending venom, assuming Amara wouldn't understand. "Don't tell me you're slumming it with the help, Ji-hoon Si, especially this kind." The racial slur hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. He was trying to create an alliance of class and race, to put Amara back in her box. Amara had been waiting for this. The humiliation, the pain, the rage she had swallowed, it had all been compressed into a single point of diamond-hard resolve. This was the moment, her moment. She set her napkin down on the table. She looked up at Choi Min-jun, truly looked at him for the first time, and the deferential mask was gone. Her eyes were not pleading or afraid. They were ancient and cold and filled with a terrifying clarity. She leaned forward slightly, and in a voice that was calm, clear, and laced with the hard, guttural consonants of a perfect Busan dialect, she spoke. "돼지농장 주인의 아들은 제 코가 타지 않도록 조심해야 할 겁니다. The son of a pig farmer should be careful not to get his own snout burned." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb being disarmed. It was the silence of a world tilting on its axis. Choi Min-jun froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, mottled gray. His mouth hung open. It wasn't just that she had spoken Korean. It was the dialect, the working-class, tough-as-nails dialect of the southern port city, a world away from his polished soul accent. It was the idiom, a piece of slang used by gangsters and loan sharks. It was the content, a direct, deeply insulting reference to his family's humble origins, a secret they had spent 2 generations and billions of won trying to bury. In that one sentence, she had stripped him of his power, his status, and his perceived superiority. She had reached into his past and held his shame up for all to see. Ji-hoon's face was a mask of stone, but his eyes burned with a cold, triumphant fire. He had known she was competent. He had not known she was a weapon. Amara slowly rose to her feet. Her posture had changed. She was no longer the stooped, invisible waitress. She stood tall, her shoulders squared, her chin high. She was a pillar of dark silk and righteous fury. She met Min-jun's horrified gaze. "You speak of my clumsiness," she continued, her Busan accent sharp as a knife. "But you are the one who is clumsy. You sign documents without reading the holding company clauses. You approve wire transfers to shell corporations and jurisdictions with no extradition treaties. You run a human trafficking pipeline through your father's shipping containers, and you are so arrogant, so clumsy. You use the same logistics manager for both legitimate and illegitimate cargo." Every word was a hammer blow. Min-jun stumbled back a step, his breathing ragged. His friends were edging away, their faces pale with terror. This was no longer a game. This was an execution. Who are you?" he whispered, the words barely audible. Amara allowed herself a small, cold smile. "I'm just a waitress," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "A waitress with good ears and a better memory." She looked past him, her eyes meeting Ji-hoon's. The negotiation was over. The alliance was forged. This was no longer his battle, with her as a pawn. It was their war, and she was leading the charge. The days that followed were a blur of calculated warfare. Kwon Ji-hoon moved Amara from the restaurant floor to a penthouse suite that served as a command center. It was a sterile, glass-walled space overlooking the glittering sprawl of the city, equipped with a network of servers and encrypted communication lines that made her old firm's setup look like a child's plaything. He gave her access, security, and unlimited resources. He provided the infrastructure. She provided the strategy. It was a partnership forged in the cold fire of mutual interest. He wanted to dismantle the Choi Empire, a rival that had been a thorn in his family's side for decades. She wanted justice, not the abstract, sanitized justice of a courtroom, but a visceral, personal reckoning. She worked with a relentless, focused intensity. The subservient waitress was gone, replaced by the sharp, analytical mind she had been forced to suppress. She moved through terabytes of data like a shark through water, finding the connections, the weaknesses, the pressure points. Her knowledge of the Choi, gleaned from her previous investigation, combined with Ji-hoon's vast resources, made her unstoppable. She uncovered the full scope of their depravity. The trafficking was worse than she'd imagined, a modern-day slave trade hidden within their legitimate shipping manifests. There were offshore accounts, bribery schemes involving government officials, and a trail of laundered money that financed a network of corruption. Ji-hoon watched her work, his respect growing with each passing day. He saw the way she commanded the small team of analysts he assigned to her, the precision of her logic, the cold nerve she displayed when following the darkest trails. He had intended to use her as a tool. He quickly realized she was the architect. One evening, he entered the command center to find her staring at a satellite map of the port of Incheon. She was alone, the rest of the team dismissed for the night. "You should rest," he said, his voice softer than usual. "He's moving them," she said, without turning around, her voice tight. "Min-jun is panicking. He's liquidating a shell corp and moving a shipment of textiles to a new holding facility. It's not textiles, it's people. My men can intercept the shipment at the port," Ji-hoon offered, stepping up behind her. Amara finally turned to face him. "No, your men are soldiers. They'll go in hard and fast. The Chois will write it off as a rival gang dispute. The evidence will be tainted, and Min-jun will walk away. We need him caught red-handed by the authorities, with an evidence trail so clean it shines." She pointed to a different part of the map. "He's using a new logistics company for the final leg of the transport. I've been digging into them. They're a small, independent outfit. They think they're just moving fabrics." "What is your plan?" Ji-hoon asked. He no longer gave orders. He asked for her strategy. It was a subtle but profound shift in their dynamic. "I'm going to talk to the owner," she said. "Alone. It's too dangerous. I'll send a team with you." "No." Her voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. This was the moment she overruled him. "A team of your men showing up will spook him. He'll shut down. This requires a delicate touch. He needs to believe he's talking to a fellow small business owner, not the agent of a crime lord. I can do this. You have to trust me." He studied her face, the unwavering resolve in her eyes. He saw no fear, only determination. He gave a single, sharp nod. "The risk is high. The reward is higher," she countered. "We don't just take his money. We take his name, his freedom, everything." The next day, Amara went to the meeting. Dressed not in couture silk or a waitress uniform, but in simple professional business attire, she met the trucking company owner in a drab cafe near the docks. She laid out the situation calmly, presenting him with evidence of what he was truly transporting. She didn't threaten him. She offered him a choice: become a state's witness and receive protection and financial compensation, or go down with the Choi as a human trafficker. He chose to cooperate. Her solo operation was a success. The victory was short-lived. Choi Min-jun was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are dangerously unpredictable. He couldn't touch Amara directly. Ji-hoon's security was a fortress, so he went after the one vulnerability she had left. The call came from her grandmother's nursing home. A frantic nurse explained that 2 detectives had just searched her grandmother's room and found a bag of heroin taped under her bed. They were threatening to arrest the bewildered, terrified old woman. Ice flooded Amara's veins. It was a classic crude frame-up. Before Ji-hoon could even finish ordering his men to descend on the facility, Amara was already moving. "Too slow," she said, her voice a low, vicious snarl. She was on her personal encrypted phone. "Jin-ho, it's Amy. I'm calling in the marker, the one for your brother in Cheongju." Ji-hoon watched, stunned, as she spoke in rapid-fire, slang-filled Korean. She was not calling his men. She was calling on a different network, the network of her foster father, the old-world gangsters who operated on codes of honor and loyalty that predated men like Ji-hoon. "Nursing home, 3rd floor, room 3B. Adama Diallo," she commanded. "2 fake cops. I don't want them hurt. I want them embarrassed. And I want the package. Now. Less than 10 minutes later, the nursing home's security feed, which Amara had hacked into, showed two burly tattooed men materialize in the hallway. They weren't soldiers in suits. They were street enforcers. They cornered Minjun's thugs, disarmed them with brutal efficiency, and then, in a moment of inspired humiliation, stripped them down to their underwear and marched them out into the street. The lead enforcer retrieved the package of drugs and gave a slight bow to the camera before disappearing. Amara leaned back, her breathing shaky. The cold fury was replaced by a wave of relief so intense it made her dizzy. Ji-hoon stood beside her, his expression a mixture of awe and something akin to fear. Who was that? Family, she said simply. He understood then. He had allied himself with someone who had her own army, her own code. She was not just an analyst. She was a bridge between two worlds, his world of modern corporate crime and the older, more primal world of street-level honor and violence. He crossed a line. Ji-hoon's voice was dangerously quiet. He went after family. This ends. Now. I agree, Amara said, her eyes turning back to the screens, her expression hardening into a mask of pure vengeance. But it ends my way, at a time and place of my choosing. He started this with a public humiliation. He wanted a spectacle. I'm going to give him one. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up a file. It was an invitation to the Choi Foundation's annual charity gala, the biggest society event of the year, the family's crowning moment of public philanthropy, a thin veneer of legitimacy over a rotten core. He tried to destroy my grandmother's name, she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. I'm going to burn his entire world to the ground in front of everyone he's ever tried to impress. The plan she laid out was audacious, elegant, and utterly devastating. It was not about ambushes or back-alley justice. It was about a public execution on a stage of the enemy's own making. Ji-hoon listened, and for the first time in his life, he completely deferred to someone else's strategy. This was her war, and he was now her most loyal soldier. The grand ballroom of the Solaris Hotel was a galaxy of shimmering chandeliers and fake smiles. It smelled of perfume, ambition, and the cloying sweetness of champagne. The elite of the city were all there, dressed in their finest, their laughter brittle as spun sugar. At the center of it all stood Chairman Choi and his son, Min-jun, preening like kings, accepting accolades for their supposed generosity. When Amara entered, a hush followed her. She was not on Kwon Ji-hoon's arm. She walked beside him, an equal. She wore a gown the color of dried blood, a stark, stunning column of silk that left her shoulders bare. Her hair was styled in a regal updo that highlighted the proud line of her neck. Around her throat was a single magnificent necklace of black diamonds, a gift from Ji-hoon that was less a romantic gesture and more the armament of a queen going to war. Her bandaged arm was gone, replaced by smooth, healed skin, but she still felt the phantom heat of the burn, a reminder of the debt that was about to be paid. Choi Min-jun saw her, and for a moment, his carefully constructed world stopped. He saw the waitress, the black woman he had tortured for sport. But she was transformed. She moved with an authority that eclipsed his own, her eyes holding his with a cold, predatory promise. The fear he'd felt in the restaurant returned, 1,000 times stronger. This was not a coincidence. This was a reckoning. Amara and Ji-hoon moved through the crowd, which parted for them as if they were royalty. They stopped directly in front of the Choi family. Chairman Choi, Ji-hoon said, his voice polite but edged with steel. Min-jun. Chairman Choi, a pompous man with a soft face, smiled broadly. Kwon Ji-hoon, a pleasure to see you, and you've brought a lovely guest. He looked at Amara, his eyes dismissive, not recognizing her at all. You remember my associate, don't you, Min-jun? Amara's voice was smooth as silk, yet it cut through the ballroom's chatter. Min-jun could only stare, his face pale and slick with sweat. I believe the last time we met, you were teaching me a lesson about carelessness, she continued, her voice carrying. People nearby began to turn, sensing the drama. I'm a fast learner. For instance, I've learned all about the Pan-Pacific Shipping Collective, a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands used to launder profits from your less savory cargo. Chairman Choi's smile faltered. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Amara took a step closer, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. She switched to Korean, the language he had used to mock her. You use it to pay off customs officials in 3 different countries. You use it to fund the private security firm that kidnaps refugees from detention centers. You use it to hide the money you skim from this very foundation. Each statement was a precise surgical strike. Chairman Choi staggered back as if physically hit. Min-jun looked like he was about to be sick. You tried to frame an innocent old woman. Amara's voice was now a low, vicious whisper meant only for them, but the venom in it was palpable to everyone watching. You threatened my family. You thought because I served your food, I was less than human. You were wrong. Min-jun finally found his voice, a desperate, pathetic squeak. We'll pay you, whatever you want. Just stop. Amara looked at him, and there was no pity in her eyes, only a vast, cold emptiness that had been filled with purpose. You don't have anything I want. She raised her eyes, looking past them to the large screens on either side of the stage, which were currently displaying the Foundation's logo. What I want, she said, her voice rising to once again command the room, is for everyone to see you for what you are. On cue, the logos on the screens flickered and died. They were replaced by documents, bank statements from the Pan-Pacific Shipping Collective, scanned wire transfers to corrupt officials, shipping manifests with hidden compartments detailed in red, and then photos. Photos of the desperate, frightened faces of the men and women in the shipping containers. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Phones came out, recording. The quiet murmurs erupted into a roar of shock and outrage. The empire of Choi was not just being attacked, it was being publicly, humiliatingly vivisected. As the investors and society figures scrambled away from the Chois, as if they were contagious, Amara delivered the final blow. She held up her phone. Every document you see is now in the hands of the National Tax Service, the prosecutor's office, and every major news outlet in Asia. Your assets are frozen. Your legacy is ash. She had used her skill, her analytical mind. She hadn't needed a gun or a knife. Her weapon was the truth, deployed with the precision of a sniper. Chairman Choi collapsed, clutching his chest. Min-jun simply stood there, a hollowed-out man, his life in ruins around him. He looked at Amara, his eyes pleading. She met his gaze one last time, her expression unyielding. Then she turned her back on him and walked away. The authorities arrived minutes later, their sirens a mournful symphony for the fallen. They were not the cavalry. They were the cleanup crew. The battle had already been won. 6 months later. The view from Amara's office was breathtaking, a panoramic sweep of the city from the 75th floor of Kwan Tower. The office wasn't a gift. It was the headquarters of the Global Risk Division, a new, legitimate, and wildly profitable arm of Kwan Enterprises that she had built from the ground up. She was not an employee. She was a partner. She was on a conference call, her voice crisp and authoritative as she delivered a complex geopolitical analysis in flawless Korean. She wore a sharp, tailored pantsuit, her hair braided in a style that was both elegant and professional. She was the woman she was always meant to be, a woman of power and intellect, finally in a world that had a place for her. After the call, she walked over to a framed picture on her credenza. It was of her grandmother, smiling, sitting in a sun-drenched garden, a paintbrush in her hand, healthy, safe, happy. The reason for everything. The door opened and Kwon Ji-hoon walked in. He moved with the same quiet authority, but the coldness in his eyes was gone when he looked at her. It was replaced by a deep, abiding respect and a warmth that was more profound than any shouted declaration of love. He didn't speak. He simply placed a small, steaming cup of tea on her desk. It was a rare, wild-grown green tea from Jirisan Mountain, the kind Chairman Kim, the old man from the restaurant, used to drink. She knew Kim was Ji-hoon's mentor, a silent kingmaker who had recognized her potential from the very beginning. The tea was not just a drink. It was a symbol, an acknowledgement of her place in their world, an anointing. Amara picked up the cup, its warmth seeping into her hands. She met Ji-hoon's gaze over the rim. In the quiet space between them, a universe of understanding passed. There was no need for words. They were 2 solitary, dangerous people who had found in each other a reflection of their own strength. It was not a fairy tale romance. It was an alliance of survivors, a partnership of equals, forged in fire and sealed with justice. A rare, small smile touched his lips, a sight so infrequent that it felt like a seismic event. She smiled back, a genuine, radiant smile of her own. She was home, not in a place, but in a state of being, fully seen, fully valued, unbreakable. Her fight for survival had ended in a triumph she had earned with her own mind, her own courage, her own hands. What would you have done for the person you love most?